After so many years of people wishing for an open world Pokemon game, it's finally here. The Ninth Generation opens up the linear structure and confined nature of the recent Pokemon games, and releases to a lot of disappointment and harsh critique. And all that just months after Pokemon Legends Arceus, also developed by Game Freak, came out to much praise and offered people a new perspective on the franchise that many people wish would take over the classic formula of mainline Pokemon games. And all that just 2 months after Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl came out and crushed a lot of hopeful nostalgic souls. Well, seems like we have a lot to cover, but finally here it is, my review and analysis, whatever that means, but I hear it's good for the YouTube algorithm, of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. What happened, how did we get here, and why are the games so much fun? June 2019. In a Pokemon Direct we saw a trailer for the wild area of Pokemon Sword and Shield. The one and only area in Sword and Shield where you were able to roam around freely, move the camera, and go wherever you want, finding loads and loads of different Pokemon of varying levels, even much higher than your team was at. So obviously everyone asked the following question: why isn't the entire game like that? It's not like 3D environments and camera movements are something new to the industry, and the Nintendo Switch has already proven itself to be powerful enough to shoulder open world games. But Game Freak seems to just be a little bit slower than everyone else, and the rest of Sword and Shield looked good enough, even though it ended up being kind of shit, so hopes were high that the next generation would be taking more steps forward than the 8th one did. And could you imagine how good the Gen 4 remakes are going to look like? They might even make the entire Mount Coronet area into a wild area, or the post-game island. Oh, and can you imagine how good the distortion mode is going to look like in HD? Oh, fuck me. Well, who knew this would happen? Game Freak are notoriously overworked. Pushing out Pokemon game after Pokemon game can't be satisfying or fun if it's literally the only thing you do. I mean, really, like, I would love to work for the franchise, honestly, it's literally my dream job, like, I studied game design. So for Game Freak not just having to work on the mainline games and their third versions, or in Sword and Shield's cases DLC, but also the remakes seems like a really tough schedule. Especially if games just tend to look continuously better and better and offer bigger and bigger worlds. So when the announcement came that for the first time a mainline Pokemon game was developed by a different studio than Game Freak, I was excited. Just think about the resources that would save for Game Freak they could be putting into the next generation games instead. But for some reason the developer they chose to develop the Gen 4 remakes was Ilka, and they gave them not nearly enough time to develop, test and release these games. Literally the entire post-game island didn't exist in the files before the day one pitch, and a lot of the music was still placeholder quality and bugs and glitches were everywhere. Also, no big changes were made to the overworld of the games, and pretty much none of the platinum enhancements made it into the final games. In the future I want to take a closer look at the BDSP disaster and examine all their shortcomings in detail, but for now it suffices to say that they are just below expectations and are generally regarded as looking like shit. Still, you might think this is a good thing. Offloading remake development to Ilka should free up precious development time for Game Freak and help them keep their schedule up while improving on quality and quantity of content, instead of having to split up everything into many different teams and games. But mere seconds after the announcement of BDSP, another game was also announced, Pokémon Legends Arceus, developed by Game Freak, releasing just months after the Gen 4 remakes and taking a wholly different take on the franchise. Real-time action gameplay where you actually throw the balls manually at the Pokemon, a vastly different battle system, new progression systems and a much darker story. For many people, me included, this game ended up being a fresh and amazing take on the Pokemon world and franchise, and rekindled that small hope of flame within our minds that one day we would play a fantastic new, classical game of the franchise again. And then, 1 month after Arceus released in February 2022, a new trailer aired and showed us the first footage of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, the first new games of the 9th Pokemon generation, releasing later that same year for the Nintendo Switch. I still have a hard time figuring out how exactly all that happened in such a small time frame. Legends Arceus literally had a huge game update come out the same day as the announcement for the new games, when most people were just expecting them to do DLC for Arceus, which would have been really cool probably, but honestly, I was pretty hyped. Like, what do you want from me? Pokemon's like the only thing in my life giving me joy. Don't let my boyfriend hear that. Still, it's weird just how tight all these releases and announcements were, and obviously I would have done it completely differently. But financially, I bet it was a great couple of months for Game Freak, especially now that Scarlet and Violet are already closing in to take over Gold and Silver to become the third most selling games of the franchise, after Gen 1 on first and Sword and Shield on second place, which I regard as an international tragedy. But the early announcement, at the end of February, the game would release in November, led to a pretty mediocre hype cycle. Few trailers and little footage literally drove the one big leaker to release pictures of the games and answer questions himself. He said official info came in too slow, so he spilled all the beans before Game Freak even got a chance to cook the beans into neat little trailers. Is that how you do metaphors? Clearly a very suboptimal situation, but honestly, the marketing of recent games has been pretty poor. I will cover it more in detail in the Legend Arceus video I've planned, but for that game it became a meme after a certain point that we got to see the Cleaver battle again and again in all the trailers when it was literally the least interesting thing from the game. Keeping many of the features and content a mystery can work really well, but when the marketing suffers because of secrecy, it can easily lead to people thinking a game is boring and doesn't have a lot of content, and others to show off everything illegally, leading to yet another Pokémon game where all the new Pokémon and lots of new things were basically public knowledge months before the game even came out. And that is literally the worst way to get information. Unfiltered tweets and blurry pictures don't nearly contain enough context to really see the game as a whole and judge it as such. Which is why I'm here now to provide you with a very much distilled review and analysis of the Ninth Generation games, pre-DLC and after some big patches which, well, we'll talk about that later. But now, the game. An open world is the video game equivalent of add more cheese if you think about it. If a game is good and a big open world provides lots of content, that means that more content of a good game is exactly what you want. And ever since Skyrim came out in 2011, there have been lots of mashup pictures shared online putting Pokemon into Skyrim screenshots and saying, wouldn't this be the best thing ever? And honestly, who could disagree? Especially when the, at the time, recent Pokemon games got quite linear and felt more and more constrained, with tutorials and hand-holding reaching new levels of horribleness. And I guess this is basically one of the core ideas this game must have started out with. Sadly, as it seems to happen often, the first hours don't really fulfill this promise because the setup of our journey and story of the game takes the front seat and only slowly introduces us to the world, in this case literally because it even takes a few minutes before the game finally allows us to run and not just walk slowly. The setup in this game is actually quite interesting though, and the reason why I like Pokémon Ranger 2 so much. We're going to be a student in the big academy of the Paldea region and learn how to be a great Pokémon trainer. Now obviously this goes completely against the concept of an open world. Being confined to classes and assignments won't allow the open world to shine. And for the first proper open world Pokémon game, that would not go over well with the fans. Maybe in the future the idea of a school setting, properly developed, can turn out great. But here, except for the first hour of the game, the fact that you're in the academy doesn't really come up. The worst part for most people is obviously the school uniform, which you're not allowed to change out of. So except for hats, bags and shoes, you can't customize your clothing, which absolutely sucks. Luckily you get some more uniforms when you purchase the DLC for just 35 euros, buy now! And they totally don't suck, you totally want to look like how a 50-year-old dresses to not stand out when lying down in the middle of a pine forest, right? At least we can now customize our faces and hair like never before, with gender barriers being broken down completely. So maybe in the next game we will finally have what we should have gotten here already, with more proper clothing? Then we only need more body types and skin colors and I'll be happy. But back to the story setup. Comparing it to other games, it's obviously not as bad as Sun and Moon dared. Soon enough we have free reign of the pretty big first area in front of Mesagosa, which allows us to play the game properly and catch quite a lot of cool new Pokemon. The only main gameplay element missing is the legendary Pokemon we will be riding, as well as access to terrestrializing, both which we will get quite soon after entering the city and continuing the introduction. In addition to setting up the important characters, it also starts off the three main goals we will have on the treasure hunt. The excuse to have both a school setting, but also an open world you can freely explore. And honestly, I don't mind that at all, but it could have been set up a lot more interestingly. There's no need to have your character be completely new to the academy or region. You could have just been a student already, with you and your friends waiting for a long time for this next treasure hunt to start, where you finally get a Pokemon of your own and free reign of the Paldea region. But what to do during this treasure hunt? Just walking around and catching Pokemon? No. When you think about the classic Pokemon formula, what do? Take on gyms, fill the Pokédex, defeat the evil team and grow as a person. So it's very understandable that for Scarlet and Violet, they took these as a basis for their story, resulting in the gym stuff, the Team Star stuff, and the Titan story. 3 stories separated by the participating characters and locations to visit. Pokemon's approach to the open world is one that is quite open in that you can tackle these 3 stories in any order you like, or all at once, and can approach each gym or Titan or Team Star base in any order you want. And here we have one of the biggest points of contention for fans of this game. None of the content scales to your level or progress through the story. The Bug type gym leader will always be the weakest, the Fighting type Team Star leader always be the strongest. The game itself doesn't specify the level range for any of the content, but it does give you vague hints of the power level of each opponent when you check them out on the map. But even those descriptions don't really tell you the full story, and the difference between 4th and 5th gym leader aren't easily understood. So a lot of people were quite upset when they found out they were vastly overleveled for quite some content, just because they chose to go their own way and not follow a guide or the map. And that sucks. When people feel this way, then you failed as a game designer. But I do get what they were going for, I think. After finishing up in Mesagosa City, Arwen and Nemona want you to go to opposite directions, which is basically the game telling you to choose and make your own way. Clove, the first Titan, where Arwen wants you to go, and Katie, the Bug type gym leader, which Nemona advises you to take on first, are also pretty even with their level requirements, with the region of the olive fields and the rock maze thingy being pretty similar with their levels as well. And with Paldea being designed like a circle enclosing a mysterious crater, I saw pretty quickly once the map was released that the decision, left or right, would be pretty obvious and fun if handled well. It would lead to interesting conversations and a great new experience doing a second playthrough, but would only really work if all the encounters were somehow scaled to a level. But when you look at what it really does look like, with no level scaling at all, the world is kinda built to guide you through each half of Paldea equally, culminating in the snowy mountains far up north. But not really. First you have the Psychic type gym leader requiring you to backtrack to the far southwest, and then the Paradox Pokemon in the desert, which is far stronger than anything else in your trek. Also there's a big hole between the Dark type Team Star base and the Water type gym leader, meaning you're kinda being pushed towards checking out the other side of Paldea if you chose to go west first. Only to then have to fight against weak Clove and the Grass type gym leader before finally catching up again, and then, well, then what? Do you stick there for now or do you go back west? Connecting the points of interest by level range, you get a weird mess of crisscrossing back and forth between the west and east of Paldea, which obviously isn't very intuitive at all and not how most people played these games. So chances are you're going to accidentally run into an opponent that is much lower level than what you are currently at, or find someone who is much stronger than you, both of which isn't ideal at all. So it's kinda understandable that many people would have wanted level scaling to be implemented, so that no matter which gym leader you battle, they will always be a challenge. I get it, but it's definitely not an objectively better way to design a game. I personally think a compromise would be fine, where the weakest gym leaders, titans and whatnot only scale up their team to level 20, so you could still overlevel if you want to, but those who go out of their way to explore and follow their own order of things have a bit more freedom without missing out on difficulty. Still, the way it is now, the game is not well balanced at all. Even if you do everything in order, you're too strong in one battle, and then with the next one you're all of a sudden lagging behind in the level curve. And honestly, I can see how this game must have been an absolute hell to balance, because so much stuff is optional that you could either run from one point of interest to the next, or spend an hour in the open world battling trainers and catching Pokemon, both of which will make you stronger. Finally, after Sword and Shield didn't really have trainer battles in the open world, this game has quite a lot of them, but they are all optional. Instead of fighting when you run into their field of view, trainers now want to actively be talked to start a fight. This means that all encounters are always optional, which is quite a change for a Pokemon game and really becomes obvious on the second playthrough when you realize that you can basically just run from one town to the next with no downtime whatsoever. Even though there are always a couple of trainers placed directly at the roadside, you will still have to actively talk to them to start a battle. Random encounters with wild Pokemon are also gone for good, meaning that you are more free in more ways than it first seems. There is literally nothing to stop you from wandering all the way to the north of the map, which is filled with strong wild Pokemon and trainers, only to end up not being able to do anything there, because even if you do catch a high level Pokemon there, it won't always obey your commands. So level scaling would have fixed that, right? Well, in my opinion, there is nothing to fix here. Either your world is like the Wasteland in Fallout 3, where you can do everything at any time, so there's basically no progression because all areas have to be designed to be the first one you do, or your world is like in Fallout New Vegas and actually good. What I'm saying is, these are different design philosophies with different strengths and weaknesses, both of which are totally valid and okay. The only thing that isn't okay is the fact that once again the snowy region is high level, which for some reason always happens, making ice-type Pokemon weirdly hard to get, which sucks. But I was talking about the trainer battles, so let's pick up that topic and talk about them. First off, I really hated Sword and Shield for not having a lot of trainer battles in general. The Galar region was quite small and rushed, and none of the 3 open areas had any classic trainer battles, so the game ended up having the least trainer battles in the whole franchise, with the exception of Legends Arceus, which had a completely different focus. So at first I was quite happy to see that there were a lot of trainer battles to be had in Scarlet and Violet. The placement of the trainers is quite weird because most of them just stand in the middle of empty fields doing literally nothing, and instead of having a lot of different trainer classes, a majority of trainers are now students of varying ages who are also on their treasure hunt. It would have been really cool to see a row of fishermen at the rivers or miners gathering for a break in one central area of the mining desert, but at least we have a few trainers standing directly next to the main roads connecting all the towns. The trainers now all look a bit different from one another, even if they're the same trainer class, which is a great improvement, but still makes me wish for more variety. Bring back bug catchers, sailors and the likes. It's such an easy way to give each part of the map a different feel and atmosphere. Once again, the biggest complaint about the trainers is that most of them only use one Pokemon. And while there are a couple of trainers out there who are supposed to be stronger, denoted by their differently colored speech bubble before talking to them, it does feel like you're mostly just battling people with one Pokemon and no strategy whatsoever, which absolutely sucks. Even though strong trainers only have 3 Pokemon, and almost none of them have a held item or real strategy behind anything to teach new players interesting team combinations. Remember in Sun and Moon, which are still some of the best Pokemon games in my opinion, you had these kinds of trainers as well. They wanted you to defeat all the other trainers on a route first before they challenged you, and they always had something interesting going for them. Using zap moves, using special held items, or team ideas. It was really great. Now we don't even have double battles anymore, although the trailer for the second DLC seems to imply that it's going to have at least some double battles going on, which is appreciated. In the main game, only the Ghost-type gym has double battles as its gimmick, which is definitely not enough. Another thing that was removed is the set option for battles. Now the game always tells you which Pokemon your opponent is going to throw out, if they even have more than one Pokemon, and it gives you the opportunity to switch out. This is absolutely silly and an unfair advantage for you, and obviously not the way online matches go. It's stupid that this has just always been the standard way for many people to play these games, but it's even worse now that they simply took the set option out, making it annoying if you still want to play that way. So while I am happy that trainer battles are a lot more numerous than in Sword and Shield, and that all the trainers now don't look like clones anymore, there is still a lot to be desired of the trainer battles in these games, which is a shame because while it is a step in the right direction, there is still a lot of potential being left unused. Roaming wild Pokemon also have a lot of potential in them. No longer having random encounters is great. Battling the Pokemon wherever they are, running into them and just starting a battle just feels good, even though Legends Arceus was a bit more dynamic. But more important for an open world game than the battles is the behavior of the Pokemon when they're just walking about, living their lives. Now I am pretty happy with the amount of Pokemon we can see at once. I honestly didn't think we would see this many Pokemon on screen at the same time with the Switch generation, and given the performance of the games maybe we shouldn't have, but I just love seeing so many different Pokemon walking around. Even the small little families of one evolved Pokemon surrounded by its unevolved peers is super cute. Running around and then seeing a herd of Mudbray and Mudstale seemingly running towards something is just great, and I wish the draw distance was a bit further so we could actually see Pokemon further away from us, having some "whoa, look at that thing back there" moments. But honestly, a lot of the behavior you're going to see is just the Pokemon randomly walking around and maybe running at you or away from you. There are definitely a number of really cool things the wild Pokemon can do, like sleep under a tree, eat some berries, have some interesting reactions to you. Supposedly they might even attack one another. But A, you don't really have any incentive to not just run around, riding your Rhydon all the time, zooming past every wild Pokemon within seconds of the huffing and puffing switch spawning them in. And B, everything is so darn small. Don't get me wrong, I love the fact that everything is much more to scale finally, even retaining the different sizes they started to actually visually show in Legends Arceus, but sadly the combination of zoomed out camera when riding Miraidon and Koraidon, and the terrible resolution being put out by the Switch, a lot of the smaller Pokemon just don't even register, leading to a lot of run-ins with Rookidee or Flabebe and just not being able to see anything they're doing. Still, this is a solid first or second or third step for this concept, and I'm sure the next games will be better, and you know what, I take it back. Obviously Game Freak have shown again and again that properly fixing things isn't quite in their repertoire, which brings me to follower Pokémon, which is closely linked with a new feature called the Let's Go mode. Once Pokémon models were fully equipped to roam the overworld, and the games would routinely display many Pokémon simultaneously to us anyway, follower Pokémon were basically a no-brainer and an easy to implement feature, even if that feature, only implemented with the basic necessities, would be pretty simple. Remember Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where you could talk to your follower Pokémon and the reactions you would get would fit to the environment you are in right now? Or are taken from a huge list of sentences, trying to personalize your Pokémon? Or Let's Go, letting you ride on some of your follower Pokémon? Or Sun and Moon, which didn't really have follower Pokémon, but where a lot of NPCs would mention the first Pokémon in your team as if it was standing right next to you, with even some special interactions? All of these things require development time spent on them, but they go really far in making the follower Pokémon feel great. Sadly, Scarlet and Violet takes the easy route here and basically reuses what they did for the Isle of Armor back in Sword and Shield. Only in the DLC areas did they let you take out one of your team and follow you, which was honestly quite unexpected and a really cool surprise. Quickly people noticed though that the feature wasn't really usable at all, because none of the Pokemon's speed is tied to that of your character, meaning they will all lag behind at some point and be called back into their Pokeball, making this experience quite terrible if you ask me. And while it does make sense, and actually gives each species a fair bit of personality, the fact that so many of the Pokemon are just way too small to ever travel beside you is just not what people wanted. You can interact with your Pokemon here again in Scarlet and Violet, but other than the happy animation, there isn't anything of relevance happening, though it is cute that they can run around you and eventually may fall asleep. It does show that the follower Pokemon were mostly an afterthought though, specifically an afterthought of the Let's Go feature, which is terribly named, so I will call it Auto Battle. For Auto Battle, you do press a different button than the one to let your Pokemon out, which to be fair is basically just the throw Pokeball of your first teammate button, and then the Pokemon appears and runs straight ahead looking for battles. If there is a Pokemon in their way, they will automatically start a battle, which takes less than 5 seconds. The winner is determined by level, types and attacks, and once your Pokemon has won, it usually looks for the next opponent. Now, why does this feature exist? The XP you gain is very reduced and even calculated completely differently, and there's no way to catch an auto battle Pokemon. I basically just came up with 2 uses. Either you are surrounded by way too many wild Pokemon and just want to get out without being thrown into an actual battle with all the animations, or it's for grinding. The move from TMs being single use to multi-use in Gen 5 was one that many people loved, me included. Obviously it did take away the interesting choice of who do I teach this cool new move to, and made it so that once you found a really good TM, half or more of your team suddenly knew that move. But especially for post-game, it was a godsend. No longer did you have to painfully choose who to give your single Rock Slide TM to, but could simply use it for whoever you wanted right now, with no downside. Sword and Shield still had multi-use TMs, but also included TRs, which were single-use and mostly covered all the good moves like Ice Beam and Thunderbolt, while TMs were relegated to the less powerful and useful moves. TRs were a common reward in the raid battles of that game, meaning it was quite easy to farm them, but it did feel kind of inelegant with 2 different kinds of move teaching item, and the hurdle of using up one of a finite amount of TRs made me use TRs a lot less. And now the single-use TMs are fully back, but how do you get them? Some event-only raids do reward them, but mostly will have to craft them at a crafting station on one of the new open-air Pokémon centers, using the material you get when defeating Pokémon, for which the Let's Go Auto Battle is the easiest way. So you're back to grinding TMs again, them being very scarce, and you having a lot of inhibitions to actually using them on your team. It's just a pointless grind and really terrible because the items wild Pokémon drop aren't used for anything interesting. It would be a lot less terrible if instead of each Pokemon line dropping their own items, like Mudbray Mud or Shink's Fangs, but rather more general items like fur or scales. You could just not have the material drop at all, but Pokemon does have a lack of other items that could drop. Like, for some reason, open world games need to have you gather material of some sort. Even Zelda Breath of the Wild had what felt like hundreds of different kinds of mushroom, fruit, fish and monster material to collect, all with their own effects and uses, with Tears of the Kingdom even adding on to all of that. The Witcher 3 had like a million different kinds of herbs and trash items that were good for nothing but selling, and Skyrim, as with all Bethesda games, is just full of needless stuff for you to collect. And honestly, this new kind of item economy is not appealing to me at all. You're basically flooded with potions when exploring, so you'll never run out of any healing item, negating any difficulty that might ever have come from the open world exploration aspect. And it's just weird to me how the world seems like it's cluttered with trash or forgotten items just laying around everywhere. But back to the Let's Go feature and what I actually wanted to talk about. Our first of the 3 storylines, and in my mind the weakest overall, the Starfall Street. Once you go to school, you find Penny, who's being attacked by 2 Team Star grunts. So you help her out and hear the amazing battle music, which is sadly underused because compared to other evil teams, you don't spend too much time fighting the grunts. Later on you start to get called by a person calling themselves Cassiopeia, who wants to dismantle Team Star and needs your help with that, so you travel from one Team Star base to the next and defeat each admin there. But how do you get to battle them? Well, first you get in the general vicinity of one of their camps and a cutscene starts, introducing the character of Clive, who is actually just the director of his school, Clavel, in disguise. He works undercover to find out just what Team Star actually wants and who they are. They are former students of the academy and have a reputation of bullying, something he as the director can't just leave unattended. So far, so stupid. But hey, it's a game for kids, it doesn't have to make sense if the context of the story is good. And even more important is the gameplay. And this is where the Let's Go auto battle feature comes back. See, Team Star follows a strict code, and anyone who is able to defeat 30 of their Pokémon within 10 minutes can battle their leader. These battles are actually really cool because the 5 bosses, Giacomo, Mela, Atticus, Ortega and Eri, all stand on their respective Starmobile, which is a modded version of the Pokémon Revavroom, which you then actually fight as their last Pokémon. Visually this is really cool and unique, even though I've heard criticism of these 5 battles being samey because of the Starmobile, and obviously it would have been cooler to have all of them use a different gimmick, but personally I'm fine with it. Especially because these fights can become quite tricky and difficult, with the Starmobiles being quite sturdy with strong attacks, which is always fun. Where the fun stops, however, are the cutscenes. After defeating a boss, you get a bit of a flashback to when Team Star first properly formed, and you can see some key moments of their first steps. The flashbacks never go too far back though, because that would spoil the twist of Cassiopeia, our secret boss for this mission, who was once the leader of all of Team Star. This maybe interesting story is being told in the worst way though. Like I said, once you get in the close vicinity of one base, you get a forced cutscene. Then you get a cutscene before the gate, then you do the minigame and the boss battle. After the battle you get one cutscene with the flashback, a cutscene with the boss and Clive, plus whoever happens to show up here too. Then you get a cutscene when leaving, with Cassiopeia calling you and giving you rewards. And then the cutscene continues with Penny, who gives you more rewards and interacts with your legendary. That's just too much happening at once. And basically just happening at you. If you're not fully invested, you're probably not even properly reading anything these people say, especially if you can guess the twist of Cassiopeia being Penny early, and honestly, who couldn't? I thought they would actually do a fake out and there would be another person, because it was just too obvious, but no, it really is that twist. And I mean, the story isn't terrible. Team Star actually being the ones who were bullied and there being a lot of school politics involved with it all in the backstory is great. And Penny is a really cool character too. But just the way this story is presented makes it so hard to actually praise and think about, it's mind-boggling. If you just take the Cassiopeia twist away, it would make things so much easier, because she wouldn't get any lines and Penny can shine as a character from the beginning. But instead, we always get a cutscene with her on the phone and then another cutscene with her in person using her fake personality. This storyline is also too focused on the 5 bases. Maybe if there was a 6th objective that was like in a town or somewhere else, where you actually had to do something different other than raid a base and fight a boss, or where interacting with Penny a lot more naturally, this might have worked out a lot better. But sadly they had to limit the storyline to just the bases and had to push all the plot and the characterization into these 5 missions, which absolutely hurts it all. Because the 5 squad bosses are like really cool characters, all with a little storyline to themselves, which is overshadowed by all the cutscenes and dialogue going on around them. Design-wise, Game Freak is really hitting it out of the park, as expected by now, so I wish we could do just a bit more with these people other than rebattle them in post-game, even though that is a nice touch. I do wish the bases would disappear though, or at least change visually once they become the training centers, because it weirdly looks like these 10 towns seem to house more people than any of the big cities, which is ridiculous. All in all, this is the weakest of the 3 stories, both gameplay and presentation wise. The second one I want to talk about is the Urba Mystica storyline with Arven. You meet Arven quickly after finding the legendary stranded on the beach, and he gives you its Pokeball, showing how he is connected to the mystery of the main story. But his idea for the treasure hunt is to find all Herba Mystica by defeating the Titan Pokémon, and it's our job to find them and do most of the damage in the battles. He'll call you when you get close to an area where one of the 5 Titans is said to be, which is luckily less disruptive than the Team Star cutscenes, but it could have been handled much better. What's great is that for some of the Titans, you can see them from far away, whether it's the one in the desert rolling around, or the Bombardier dropping rocks from a mountain. It's really cool to see them from afar, and sometimes even having there be a challenge to get to them. Once you get close, a battle starts between you and it, where you have to get its health low, after which it will retreat, get one of the Herba Mystica and eat it to get a power boost. This is when Arven comes to help you, and now it's a 2 vs 1 battle, with the Titan Pokémon stats and health being buffed. In theory, this is really cool, and just the size of the Titans is really fun to see, especially since you can catch them after, and they are pretty strong and still really big, just not as gigantic as you might want. In practice, these battles tend to be quite boring though. Only the last one against the False Dragon Titan stood out, because it made use of the mechanic between Tatsugiri and Dondozo, with Tatsugiri, the actual Dragon Titan, hiding in Dondozo's mouth, just like they do in double battles. For the others, there really isn't a battle gimmick, which is really obvious when you compare these Titan fights to the Totem Pokémon of Pokémon Sun and Moon. There, the big Totem Pokémon get stat boosts and then call for aid, so the fights in that game give your opponent an advantage. And these 2 vs 1 battles are really fun designed, with the helping Pokémon often complementing the totem in an interesting way, making it quite hard to win even with the type advantage. Here though, your enemy is outnumbered, and the stat boosts never felt as impactful as the ones for the totem Pokémon in Sun and Moon, or especially the Ultra versions. Even from a visual perspective, these fights don't work well, because the camera is weirdly static and almost always in a bad spot, so in some of the fights you can't even see Arven's Pokémon, which could have been done much better. It also kind of feels like all of the Titan Pokémon were designed specifically for their roles here, with Cloth and Bombardier being the worst offenders in my opinion. I don't think any important trainer uses them, and since they're meant to be defeated early in the game, they are probably also really quickly forgotten about. Earthworm is used by your rival Nemona, which proves how great her tasty Pokémon is, and it has a big presence in more than just one area of the game, making it stand out quite a bit, and Tatsugiri and Dondozo are quite memorable by themselves, in addition to their battle being the most interesting. Lastly, there's the Desert Titan, which introduces the concept of Paradox Pokémon in the game before you enter Area 0, which I think is a really cool idea. This Pokémon changes depending on what version you play, just like all Paradox Pokémon available, so will either face off against Iron Treads or Great Tusk, 2 Pokémon very similar to Donphan. This ties into the big finale of the games, so I will talk about all of this later. What's weirdly noticeable to me is that all these Titan Pokémon don't have any evolutions or pre-evolutions. This again kind of makes me feel like they were just designed for this quest, which to me is a weird way to design Pokémon. Maybe they will get some love in future generations, but for now they mostly feel undercooked and like missed potential. It's like the difference between Ursaluna and Sneasler from Legends Arceus. Ursaluna has a lot going on for it, and it's also a ride Pokémon. Sneasler feels like it was designed specifically for the climbing mechanic, making it stand out. What definitely doesn't feel undercooked is the story told in this part of the game. After defeating the first Titan, you find the Herba Mystica in a cave, and Arven and you decide to make a sandwich with it. You talk a bit, and your Rhydon wants to take a bite out of your sandwich, helping it get a part of its power back. Then you decide to leave, but the game lingers a little longer and cuts away after Arven mysteriously says, "You can come out now." Turns out, Arven has a Mabostiff that was hurt in Area 0, and he's trying to heal its wounds with the Herba Mystica, which is incidentally the same thing we're trying to do with our legendary Pokémon after we found it hurt on the beach. The first cutscene of the game shows it fleeing Area 0 and then crashing down. Riding it, we are pretty limited in our speed and jumping height. Swimming is also not possible. This is where the Herba Mystica, or HM for short, get it, come in. With each one eaten, one of the abilities of your Rhydon will come back, allowing you to sprint faster, swim, jump higher, glide and climb, depending on which Titan it was you defeated. Weirdly, it seems like the Titan Pokémon were designed with the ability unlocked in mind, like Cloth that climbs around, the False Dragon Titans being fish, Bombardier being a bird, and the Paradox Donphan being quite fast. This leaves only jumping with a fitting Titan, because I just can't see Earthworm doing that as much as I love it. It doesn't matter anyway, since you need to be able to swim to even get to the False Dragon Titan, and you unlocking climbing from the easiest of the Titans, Cloth, would really change the progression through the open world, so the unlocks are quite weird, with Cloth allowing you to run fast and Bombardier unlocking swimming. Once you've unlocked all the movement options, your Rhydon is actually a really cool ride Pokémon, offering flexibility like you haven't seen before in a Pokémon game. Legends Arceus comes close, but since you always had to change between the 5 different Pokemon for each of the tasks, it wasn't nearly as flexible, and I always somehow messed up the selection and ended up in Sneasel's basket when I actually wanted to run with my Weirdeer, which never felt good. Anyway, with each sandwich full of Herba Mystica, Arven's Mabosstiff actually does get better, and it's really sweet to see its progress, from first opening its eyes to barking again. This is honestly just super cute and well done, and even actively leads into the bigger mysteries of the game, which makes this the strongest of the 3 storylines in my book. It's Pokemon and character focused, the cutscenes with Arven and the calls from the professor don't drag on, and the unlocking of traversal options always makes it feel rewarding when you finish one of the titans. Although I wish the battles themselves were better, there's just something cool about seeing a gigantic Pokemon in the wild and battle it. The sandwiches and Herba Mystica also come up as a gameplay mechanic in picnics. Just like with the camps in the wild area of Sword and Shield, you can picnic nearly everywhere in the open world. Your whole Pokemon team, as well as your Rhydon, join you and you can play with all of them. It's cute to watch them or throw a ball around, and I hope for the next game we can go back to the functionalities of Pokemon Ami, which always felt a little closer in terms of interaction with your partners. Still, it's a fun little optional feature, with a lot of basically pointless customization options available. The sandwich making is a minigame which isn't really engaging at all, and I guess most people would have just ignored it like the carry in Sword and Shield, if not for the fact that you can make sandwiches that dramatically increase your odds of finding shiny Pokemon. For many, the clunky handling of the ingredients is just an obstacle in their shiny hunting, but I've never had too many problems with it personally, and can only refer back to my Sword and Shield video and my criticism of camping there. It would be really cool if it was a deeper mechanic that we would need to use in order to heal up while far away from Pokemon centers, but alas, the game isn't anywhere hardcore enough for that, considering you will find more healing items than you will ever need to use, no matter how far away you are from a Pokemon center. This leaves us with the Victory Road, the storyline spanning all 8 gyms of the Paldea region, as well as the Elite Four and Champion fights alongside our battle-hungry friend Nemona. Pokemon Sword and Shield had a really big focus on the gym challenge, mostly because the game didn't really have anything else going for it, but I enjoyed that aspect of the game a lot. It was quite silly how the whole region of Galar seemed to be following these random people around and filled up every stadium, but the battles in there were really impressive. This was especially impactful because Pokemon Sun and Moon, the generation just before Sword and Shield, did replace the gyms with the Island Challenge, which is quite different. So the return to the gym formula was really impactful. Not all gyms in Galar were as impressive though, with some of the puzzles being pretty lackluster, especially with the last gym, which even reused a room from earlier in the game. Still, the characters were more expressive than ever, and their designs were basically as good as it gets. So I was excited to see how Scarlet and Violet would handle the gym challenge and their puzzles with the open world. Well, just like in Sun and Moon, the meat of the game doesn't happen inside buildings, but outside in the open world. The gym buildings are small towers in an identical design, but that is probably only so you can see them from afar and know just where to go. Inside these towers you don't do anything other than register yourself for the challenge and talk to some people, mostly Nemona or later some of the Elite Four members and the Champ, way before you even get to challenge them. This does make a lot of sense and works much better than just seeing the Elite Four for the first time in the league and then never again, but just like with all the cutscenes of the other 2 storylines before, it does feel a bit formulaic. So the pre-gym fight challenge always happens outside, mostly in the surrounding city area. And because I love talking about it, I will talk about each gym challenge individually, from lowest level to highest. First is the Bug-type gym with the leader of Katie, a baker. Once again, all gym leaders seem to have an actual life besides the gym battles. Those only seem to happen during the treasure hunt anyways. The gym puzzle happens in what looks like a football field just outside the city and requires you to roll a giant olive into a goal. This really reminds me of the grass gym puzzle in Sword and Shield, where you had to herd a number of Wooloo through a parkour. This is a really silly and fun little game with the classic either go the longer, more complicated way, or battle some trainers to unlock shortcuts thing. The challenge is over faster than you think though, which did make me a bit sad because you would expect there to be a bit more before the big battle. Interestingly, they actually did design 2 more courses for you to play with, but these are only unlocked after you won the gym battle, and you can do them for item rewards or to get the fastest time. I really like this, because gyms often introduce a fun gameplay mechanic only for you to be able to do it once and never again. Some of the later gym puzzles are also repeatable, which is really fun. I just wish the olive would have actually worked in multiplayer though, which might have been a cute funny diversion to play with when using the friend circle. A multiplayer option where you and up to 3 friends can walk around in the same world and even progress the game and catch version exclusive Pokemon. This has literally been one of my most wished for features, and I can't believe that we actually have it available now. I love it! Anyway, the gym battle against Katie is obviously quite easy, with her last Pokemon being a Teddy Ursa that terrestrializes to be a bug type. Every gym leader does this with their last Pokemon, which I feel split on. I had a similar complaint for the gym leaders in Galar, where the formula of their last Pokemon being the one that Dynamaxes was too obvious and boring for all except one leaders to use it. And here, with terrestrialization, the big draw of the feature is the fact that you don't know what's coming. When is your opponent going to use it? What type is their Pokemon going to change into? Gym leaders are always predictable. Oh, the water type gym leader puts Gribbrawler into the battle? I wonder what's going to happen. Ooh, it's terrestrialized into a water type. I'm shocked. At least the bug type Terra head is kinda cute with the antennae, so I can't fault the game for that, and the town surrounded by olive fields is quite quaint and pretty. Next up is the grass type gym with the leader Brassius. He's a disaster gay artist who put up his sunflower statues and other art all over the beautiful town of Artisan. This might actually be my favorite of the cities, because with Hedge Maze and the Jungle Gym you have a few fun areas to explore and find some items in. This obviously weaves into the gym puzzle, which requires you to find 10 hidden sunflower all over town. This is a really fun quest and easy enough thanks to there being more sunflower hidden than you need. Some of them even battle you, which is always a nice surprise, and honestly needed, with there not being a gym trainer for this puzzle. Once again you can retake this challenge later, with the sunflora being much better hidden now. And I honestly think I've still not found all I need to in my game. Does this quest just stay active in the background, I wonder? Maybe that's why my game performs so badly. Anyway, the battle is nothing special, except for the fun idea to have Sudowoodo terrestrialize into an actual grass type now. Like I said, it's a fun idea, but only highlights how the strongest Pokemon of the gym leader is now always an older generation Pokemon instead of one of the many new ones. Which is always disappointing, since they should always get the biggest spotlight in a game. Once again, the battle area is really beautifully designed, and with the directed camera movements, these battles are always a visual highlight of the games. Next up is the electric type gym with streamer Iono. She lets us star in one of her streams, playing a game where we have to find Director Clavel, who is hidden in a scene. It's a cute little idea and only made more difficult because of the low resolution the game is running at. Her battle is what we're really here for though, happening once again in a really cool location in the middle of the city. Her last Pokemon is a Mismagius, with the Levitate ability, making it immune to ground type attacks and leaving it with no apparent weaknesses. Really clever and just a fun gym altogether, in a really big and well designed city with many shopping opportunities and visual ideas, like the colorfully lit up night sky or the big ad signs. On the other side of Paldea, we reach the city of Cascarafa, with the water type gym leader Kohu. He's on his way to the neighboring city of Porto Marinada, where he wants to visit the market to get some fresh ingredients, because he's a restaurant chief. The gym challenge in this case is following him there, because he forgot his wallet and the employee at the gym tells us that if we help them, we'll automatically pass and get to fight Kohu. This is weird to me, because cheaping out on these challenges is always a pretty simple way to save some time and development, so I don't know if they made the challenge like this because they ran out of time to create something for this really cool looking port town, or if that was always their intent for the water type gym challenge. It luckily doesn't feel completely cheap, because the honestly kind of weird feature of bartering is introduced in this gym challenge, which you can do later on in the game to get some rare, if overpriced, items. And there's even a Pokemon battle in a neatly decorated area happening, before you can finally return the wallet to Kofu, so it definitely doesn't feel like a cheap excuse like the Dragon Gym in Sword and Shield did. Still, it leaves a weird taste in my mouth, because without this gym challenge, there would be no real reason to ever visit Porto Marinada in your playthrough, which might have been the big reason behind the decision to have the challenge lead you there. But that leads to Cascarafa being underused, which is a shame because it is a really cool multi-level city with many waterworks near the desert. Sure, it's tedious to wait for the stupid cutscenes when using the elevators, but this is a top tier town design. Same with Leventhea, where Iona has a gym. And honestly, this might be my biggest problem with these games. The cities are just completely empty. None of the regular houses can be entered, and the only shops that have an interior are the copy-pasted sandwich places and the weirdly similar to Galar and Alola looking barber shops. Everything else is handled with interfaces. It's truly terrible how shallow these cities are, now being nothing more than a glorified backdrop. I mean, yeah, it makes sense to not be able to go into each and every house as a stranger, but it's a lovable JRPG tradition that is now sorely missed. Even the NPCs out on the streets are less expressive and interesting to talk to, And that really means something, since that has never been the strength of Pokemon games. For better examples, I would recommend something like Dragon Quest, which is honestly just overwhelmingly good in this aspect. Nearly everyone has something new to say after every new event happening, meaning that each random NPC has like 8 or more different lines of dialogue, which are all used to characterize and give backstory to each person who often doesn't even have a name. You learn so much about the world through these people. And for Pokemon games it would be a great way to flesh out each city through something like this. And it wouldn't even be insanely expensive in development, it's just a few more lines of dialogue and some love. But basically, in Scarlet and Violet you can just not really do anything in the cities, and it sucks. I'm grateful that we at least got the gym challenges outdoor, because otherwise there would be nothing to do, like with the whole town of Zapapico, which literally only has the NPC with the evolution item of Charcadet in it and nothing else of value. Apparently there was an unused interior found in the data, but with that being cut, we will not know what the original plans for the town were. It even has a battle area outside that also goes completely unused and speaks volumes about the ideas that had to be cut for time. An instant fix for the empty cities, without even adding interiors to any of the houses, although that would have been great, would have been side quests. Ever since Sun and Moon, the Pokemon games started to dabble with side quests, and I loved it every time. And with Legends Arceus, we didn't just get a huge amount of side quest content, we even got a quest journal, which would have been nice in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which had so many little stories to find. And in Legends Arceus, they were pretty nice side quests, even having a real impact by populating the town with more and more Pokemon, and unlocking clothing options and much more, while also exploring the setting of a time before humans and Pokemon were proper friends. And now, Scarlet and Violet don't have any side quests whatsoever. And it shows, sadly. With the 3 stories, the Area Zero finale, and all the post-game stuff, it does have way more main story content than many previous Pokemon games, but the absence of any optional content is definitely felt. Once again I wish for a return of the 3rd versions, just so we could get a more realized version of Paldea, but the DLC looks great too, so I'm not complaining, although I am. Another big loss are the clothing options. Since X and Y, I've always looked forward to coming to a new city, because it would often have a boutique with new clothing options available, and I love dressing up my character. With Scarlet and Violet, there are dozens of clothes shops specializing on anything from ride clothes and expensive stuff to just selling socks, but since you are restricted to always wearing your uniform, the main options for customization, shirt and trousers, are basically gone. You have 4 options for your school uniforms, and 4 more if you've purchased the DLC, and in my opinion they all look horrible. There just isn't anything here that I would want my character to wear, mostly because it's all orange or full of oranges. Violet definitely has the better selection, although that's not optimal either. It would have been an improvement if we could have chosen our tops and bottoms separately, but alas we only get to pick between the spring, summer, autumn and winter sets that are pre-selected. Pretty boring and absolutely not okay, especially because we get so many other customization options we haven't had before, with different eyes, noses, mouths, etc., and a pretty decent selection of hairstyles. It's a very disappointing choice, especially after Sword and Shield's weird fixation on your uniform, once again taking player customization out of most of the important moments. The next gym is the normal type gym, whose leader is fan favorite Aoki. Here your task is to find out what the locals typically order at the famous restaurant in town, which makes you investigate the town to find the 4 hints. This seems like a pretty low budget mission, but it works pretty well because it has you engage with the town and the people in it, which is definitely missed in many other towns. Once you've successfully solved the puzzle, the restaurant changes to be the battlefield for the gym battle, and you can take on Aoki, a worn-out businessman, using normal type Pokemon like the new evolution for Dunsparce. Amazingly, Game Freak have finally brought back regular cross-chain evolutions since their absence since Diamond and Pearl. We did have Sylveon in X and Y, the Alolan versions of for example Marowak and Exeggutor, and in Galar the regional evolutions, but nothing like a simple new evolution for a Pokemon that we know already. With Arceus we got a weird mix, with Quillfish weirdly receiving a regional variant and that an evolution, leaving regular Quillfish behind, just like with Farfetch'd back in Sword and Shield, and for some reason Basculin gets another form which can evolve, and its evolution Basculegion has 2 different forms, one red and one blue, like what the heck are you trying to tell us here? But with Ursaring and regular Standler now being able to evolve into the amazing Ursaluna and Weirdeer, and with Scyther getting an alternative new evolution with Cleavor. Weirdly, none of these evolutions are available natively in Scarlet and Violet, despite Ursaring and Standler being featured in the game, taking these exciting new additions away again and making these 2 Pokemon lose almost all of their modern appeal. But just like was the case back in the day with the 2nd and 4th generation, there are now a handful of new evolutions for already existing Pokemon, namely Dunsparce, Girafarig, Primeape, and also the Generation 5 Pokémon Bisharp. All of these are well received and really cool and exactly what new evolutions are supposed to be like. And with Clodsire, we also get a new regional evolution of Paldean Wooper, continuing this tradition. The Johto love is big in these games and I fully appreciate this decision. Anyway, back to the fight with Aoki. The battlefield inside the restaurant is really cool, and there is even a neat little scene in the middle of fighting where you get some more spectators and the chef of the restaurant gives Aoki a pep talk. This makes the fight stand out and be really memorable, in addition to Aoki's really fun personality. Someone who has Pokemon battling as their job and isn't completely excited about that is such a left field addition for the game. It's fantastic and neatly introduces the corporation-esque way this Pokemon League seems to be handled. Next you should travel to the Icy Mountains and battle Rhyme, the Ghost-type gym leader. Her challenge is once again disappointingly simple, consisting of just a couple of battles on the stage where you will have your gym battle too. The rap gimmick is fine and all, although just like with the Dog-type gym in Sword and Shield, it weirdly highlights the fact that the game doesn't have voice acting or anything similar. Why do they always introduce a singing NPC even though it makes the lack of voice acting stand out even more? Although the rapping might have been handled a lot worse if acted out, so maybe it's better this way. This means the only really interesting thing about this gym is the fact that all of the battles are double battles, which would be a nice little extra if not for the fact that these, I think, 4 fights are basically the only double battles that you will have in these games, other than battling online or with friends. And since you are also receiving buffs to your stats from the excited crowd, means these battles are much more of a pushover than you would like. Rhyme's last Pokemon does also get the boost once it terrestrializes, which may lead to some tight situations at least. And the scenes during the battle, especially the Dancing Greavard, do make for a memorable fight. I don't understand the weird relationship Game Freak seems to have with double battles during the main game, relegating them to almost obscurity by having them be incredibly rare, even though they are such a fun and interesting, and many people will say more well balanced way to battle. Even Ruby and Sapphire, the games introducing this way of battling, didn't have too many of them, with only Emerald adding many new trainers to the overworld, enabling double battles much more frequently. The village of Montenevera again is really cool and has really cool music, fitting the rap theme, and again makes me yearn for some more content here up in the cold snowy mountains, fitting the ghost theme of Rhyme's gym. The second to last gym leader is all the way back in the southwest of the map, which you will likely reach through a really cool and big cave. Mostly the caves so far have been weirdly small and nothing more than a simple tunnel connecting one part of the map with another. And while there is a more complex cave, or rather 2 in the north at the foot of the mountain, this one is just gigantic, making big use of the maneuverability of your Rhydon, without which you would likely not even get through the cave at all. Without the likes of strength rocks for puzzles, it does feel quite shallow though, but at least you have some hidden paths to follow and explore, with battles against some trainers, which is quite frankly a big step up from the 2 mines of Sword and Shield, or the caves from its 2 DLC maps, which are a bit more complex than the mines, but devoid of trainers, making them just a breeze to go through. The town of Alfornada is once again really pretty, with murals of the original menu sprites of the Game Boy games decorating the tower with the battlefield. The gym puzzle of the Psychic Gym Leader Tulip is a little rhythm game, QTE button press game, I don't even know what to classify it as, because what mostly stands out is how horrible it feels to play because the Switch is desperately trying to display a split screen view, which even in X and Y on the 3DS didn't work fluidly and automatically deactivated the 3D effect, even if looking really cool during battles. After defeating the gym you can play this again, this time in an endless mode without any new interesting mechanics. The only noteworthy thing about this game is the fact that it's conducted by sports teacher Dendra, who lost the battle against her childhood friend Tulip, which makes sense given their preferred types, and now has to host the pre-gym battle challenge. Tulip herself is pretty busy as a model and makeup artist, and actually has some interesting dialogue to the player, even admitting that she doesn't like Geeta. The last gym leader is back in the snowy mountains up north again, which is honestly a bit weird, especially because the gym is just by itself high up the mountain. It's supposed to be the start of a snowboarding or skiing track, which makes sense with the ice-type gym leader Grusha being a retired snowboarder. And honestly, even if we did get a small mountain village, it wouldn't have been any more exciting than any of the other cities, so let's talk about the gym challenge. This one's really cool because we have to slide down a skiing track on our Rhydon. And even though the animation and handling are not the best, this challenge fits the whole theme very well and is fun enough. It's over way too quickly though, so I was really happy that we got 2 more tracks to play on after we win the gym battle, which is nothing terribly special, but I'll take it. Grusha himself is a very interesting person, who was pained by the fact he got hurt doing his pro snowboarding career and couldn't pursue it anymore, hence he's now a full-time gym leader who is quite grumpy and somber, which isn't a personality you would expect from a gym leader, let alone the strongest one. Luckily, after our rematch with him, his flame and interest in becoming stronger is rekindled, but his defeated attitude towards life does leave an impression. At least it did for me. All in all, I would say the gym puzzles are a step up from Sword and Shield, but not by much. The spectacle isn't comparable, of course, but the characters are definitely just as good as the ones from Sword and Shield, and since you get to battle them again in the postgame this time, and we'll probably get some more scenes with all of them in the second DLC, I think they did a great job with the gym leaders this time, even though I wish the terrestrialization gimmick would have played out a bit differently. Only Aoki uses the terrestrialization on a Pokemon that already has a signature type, in this case Hysteraptor, making use of the additionally strong stab damage. And only Iono does some clever tricks with her Levitate electric type Mismagius having no weaknesses. And none of the final Pokemon are new ones, with some like Maushold being completely ignored by any of the important trainers, not fully utilizing the potential of all the new Pokemon, which should always be the focus in a new generation. The talks before and after the gym battles with Nemona, where you sometimes meet a couple of the Elite Four and the Champ, do work well enough, but in the end they are too formulaic, just as the other two storylines. Some sort of quest outside of the standard gym formula would have been cool, because even when Nemona actually challenges you to a classic rival battle, it is either right before or after a gym battle, which often feels like too much at once. Especially since you just reuse the battlefield for the gym again, with the exception of Medali, where you just battle in front of the gym building itself, since the restaurant battlefield wouldn't make sense at all. After the gyms, the real challenge still awaits though, the Elite Four. This time the Pokemon League building is located pretty close to Misagotha, meaning you can go there pretty early, which is good because that's what open world games should let you do. But that also means that there's nothing like a Victory Road again, sadly. Just one really strong trainer is positioned in front of the League building, that's it. It would be cool if you could only get to the League building through some cave that would only open after getting all badges, with all the mountains surrounding the Pokemon League being too steep to climb, but alas there's nothing of the sort. Before you get to battle the Elite Four though, you first have to pass a test from Rika, in a weirdly nondescript but very fitting room. It includes quite a few questions you could get wrong, which makes you retake the exam from the beginning, but mostly because it's hard to really remember the town and gym leader names, considering how little time you spent there compared to the rest of the world and how many characters you end up meeting. Once you do pass the exam though, the battles begin in a weirdly empty looking room. This feels like a low budget solution again, even though it might fit the fact that everything about the gyms and the Pokemon League is handled much more cooperation-like by top champ Gita. I really like the Elite Four in this game and they're handled pretty well I think. They're all people you've met before, but haven't battled yet, with the exception of Aoki, who holds two positions as both the normal type gym leader and the flying type Elite Four member. This is such a fun idea and probably was what fully cements this dude into people's minds. It is weird how there's like a literal toddler who is one of the Elite Four, but I don't even know what to say about that, so let's move on to the champ battle versus Gita. This one thankfully happens on top of the Pokemon League building, so you have a view of the Paldea region, though mostly just mountains, while fighting the strongest trainer of them all. And while the music is great with strong Spanish influence, her team is definitely lackluster, with the common criticism of her last used signature Pokemon Glamora being a terrible choice as the last Pokemon because of its ability letting it lay toxic spikes passively once physically attacked. And Gita also has a Kingambit, the new evolution of Bishop, whose ability lets it get stronger the more KO'd Pokemon are in her team, making for a great signature Pokemon. Although I guess its connection to an older Unova Pokemon didn't qualify it as her signature Pokemon I guess. She does use two Kalos Pokemon though, so make of that what you will. After Leon, who did have a strong team, which was even influenced by your first partner Pokemon choice, this was a bit disappointing, especially because none of the big names even use items in battle anymore, which shocked me once I noticed it. Surely past games haven't had the best implementation of this system, with the AI using full restores and the like predictably and often in pointless situations, but I will always argue for a reworking of a mechanic that doesn't quite work, rather than for cutting it out completely. Like they did with the ability to rematch the Elite Four and the Champ. There is a battle tournament you can help organize in the postgame, and Gita and many important trainers take part in it, like some of your teachers that you weren't able to battle beforehand, but it doesn't replace this true and tried feature, which makes me sad and immediately takes great characters like Rika out of the game entirely. Once you've won against Gita, Nemona happily meets you outside of the league. She's already a true and tried trainer, and has reached champion rank even before we start our adventure. She just decided to start over with us to be our true rival, and finally we are strong enough to fight her without her having to hold back. But she still uses the team she built up through the game, instead of using Pokemon we've never seen her use before. So we meet in the middle of Misagotha and fight our final fight and obviously win against her with no problem, because just like everyone else she doesn't use hold items on her team, finishing off the Victory Road part of the game. And now? That's it, right? A short post-game story and then the endless grind of this generation? Luckily not. At the end of Arven's story, we are called by Professor Turo or Sada, depending on your version, and they turn out to be Arven's parents. Extremely hot parents. Extremely hot and extremely estranged parents, that is. Arven is really not happy about them having been gone most of his life, leaving him to take care of himself and mischief since a young age, and now they're asking for our help down in Area Zero, the forbidden crater in the middle of Paldea. For this, we need an adventuring group of a strong battler, Nemona, a tech-savvy hacker, Penny, and Arven, who can, cook, I guess. He does know his way around the place, since this is where Mobostif got injured before the game starts. Together, we venture to the gate of Area Zero and jump down on our Rhydon, who is not looking forward to going back in there, where 2 was injured before the beginning of our game. What follows now is actually a really tightly packed and cool part of the game, that might be the height of Pokémon storytelling in my opinion, because the game starts to feel like a proper JRPG. You have party members walking around with you, dialogue happening while exploring, although it still isn't voice acted so it will probably not be read in most cases, and level design that wouldn't be outlandish in a Xenoblade game. The whole stretch down to the professor at the bottom of the crater is just a really cool part of the game, which slowly introduces more of the Paradox Pokémon to you. You've already met a past or future looking version of Donphan in the Titan Quest, and now you see some more and can even catch them on your way to the bottom of Area Zero. It's kinda weird that the dialogue implies that there aren't many if all regularly known Pokémon walking around the crater, but you find Girafarig, Jumpluff, Palmy and the like everywhere, which is a bit weird and probably an oversight of an earlier version of the crater, which sounds really cool. Only finding Paradox Pokémon here, or just Pokémon that don't normally live in Paldea, would have been quite fun and make this place stand out more, I think. Once we reach the bottom, after stopping by 4 outposts, each with some interesting notes by the research teams, telling us bits and pieces of the first trip down the crater, the second version of your Rhydon attacks, revealing itself as the rival of your Ride Pokémon, and the one that wounded it before the beginning of the game. It's too strong and many Paradox Pokémon swarm you and your friends, so you quickly enter the lab and meet an android version of the Professor, who died on their quest to find out more about the Paradox Pokémon and the supposed time machine, and in an attempt to close the gate to the apparently other time, the AI fights you in what might be the best final battle in Pokémon history. Not only is the music brilliantly composed by Toby Fox, carrying forth the leitmotif that has been present through all the terrestrializing elements of the soundtrack, the Professor AI also uses, in the best case, 3 Pokémon you haven't seen until this point in the game, making for a really interesting battle. If you don't know the typing of the Pokémon and see these new versions of old classics for the first time, this battle will be incredibly memorable. Even more so than the one afterwards with your Rhydon against its rival, which is still pretty good, but simply overshadowed by the coolest character ever, standing 20 meters above you and dropping Master Balls like it's nothing. You may even see some Undertale-esque hidden text messages, which is just the best. Sadly, Arven isn't having the best time because he learns that his parent has been dead for quite a while. It makes for a really bittersweet ending because even though he has found a great group of friends with our character Penny and Nemona, his troubled history with his parent will now never be resolved. And maybe I'm just gullible, but once the Ed Sheeran song started to play, I was really moved, coming from the emotional high that was the last stretch of the game, and seeing all the cool new Pokémon like Slitherwing and Roaring Moon. But before we talk about the new Pokémon introduced in these games, I want to quickly talk about the theme of this game, because I don't feel like it has one. In Sword and Shield, the topic of younger generations replacing the older ones came up, with Sonia taking over as Professor, and Beat becoming the new Fairy-type gym leader. In Sun and Moon, the parentage theming was obvious with Lily and Lusamin's story, as well as a focus on showing our own character's mother in the beginning. And with this story, it just doesn't feel like there is one. I would have tried to connect it to the concept of freedom in gameplay and gone with a self-determination angle, showing Arven as a full person himself who doesn't need his parents, Penny as a strong person who gets stronger through her friends, and Nemona as choosing this way for herself, despite her parents' wealth, with them being CEOs of the Rotemphone company and her older sister to take over the business, which doesn't come up at all during the main game, only shortly in the talks going down Area Zero. So Nemona never gets any depth. Penny is only really fully revealed and interesting at the last stretch of the Team Star story, and Arven is always overshadowed by either his parents or his cute dog. And while it would have been neat to get some more thematic coherence, the game doesn't need it, with especially Nemona's one-dimensional attitude being quite popular with the fans. And just as popular are the new Pokémon designs of this generation. Honestly, I am once again impressed with all these new Pokémon. Although I had some trouble getting to like many of the Hisui Pokémon, This batch of new weirdos is just an immediate win for this game. With Skeledirge we might have the strongest starter or first partner Pokemon in a long while, and so many of all the designs are just working for me out of the gate. I really couldn't be happier. Some of my highlights are Lokix, Mousehold, Fido and Dexpan, Knackley, Bellibolt, Kilowattrel, Maschiff, Clove, Rella and Repska, Tinkaton, Finneson, Orthworm, Glimmet and Glomora, Greavard, Stitan, Dondoza and Tatsugiri, as well as all the new evolutions and Paldean forms. I agree that the future Paradox Pokemon are a bit samey with all of them being robots, but Iron Bundle, Hand and Moth are so cool I don't care, and Iron Jugelis has such a great LCD effect for a face, I just can't help but love it. Gimmighoul and Golden Go are such a great idea, and I loved collecting all the coins everywhere, although the sound of the Gimmighouls is still driving me crazy, and I think it would have been better to not have them respawn all the time everywhere, just the chests would have been enough. And the Rhydons are also just amazing designs, with Koraidon making me want to buy Scarlet just immediately once it was shown. A new category of Pokemon introduced are the convergent evolved forms of Diglett and Tentacool. These aren't regional forms, but different Pokemon called Wiglet and Toadscool. It's an interesting concept and I'm looking forward to seeing what more Game Freak will do with it, but so far it's not too crazy, because the evolutions also look pretty similar to the original forms, disappointing many people. I'm personally okay with that because I like Wugtrio and Toadscool, but I wonder if the concept will be as interesting as regional forms in the long run if they don't properly innovate on the known designs. And speaking of regional forms, we didn't really get a lot in this game. We got the 3 Tauros forms and Paldean Wooper getting a regional evolution to Clodsire. But I guess given the fact that we also get the Convergent Mons and the Paradox Pokemon, as well as new evolutions, they didn't want to oversaturate the reliance on old Pokemon, which is okay, especially given the fact that we got more new Pokemon than the last couple of generations out of the gate. We also get some minor legendary Pokemon with the 4 Treasures of Ruin, which are found at shrines you need to open first by finding 8 stakes hidden throughout Paldea. It's a fun collection quest that can start as early as even before you get your Rhydon, which is exciting. So throughout your playthrough it's always a joy when you find a stake, but I honestly couldn't imagine it being fun to try and find them on my own. The 4 designs are really strong and don't fall into the previous tradition of having them all look very similar, which doesn't hurt them a little in my opinion, even though I would have wished them to be a bit closer to Spanish mythology, which is a weird oversight and makes them and their Chinese names stand out. Their story explains why, and it strongly plays into the school aspect of the games, so I guess it's time to talk more about that now. After starting the treasure hunt and then after every gym badge, you unlock new courses to take at the academy in the different subjects, ranging from maths to history. Now I can't see anyone actually unironically taking these courses, and I know for a fact many people haven't bothered with them at all, even after hundreds of hours of playtime. I obviously did them all and tried to sparkle them throughout my playthrough because I wanted to see what they were all about. They are all pretty samey in terms of structure. First you have 2 classes where the teacher explains stuff, and then they ask you a question about something they just explained a few seconds before, testing if you were listening, or stuff they haven't explained yet, which might be the perfect encapsulation of school how it was. How the fuck am I supposed to know this stuff? I'm in school, you're the teacher and are supposed to explain it to me. Why do I get worse grades than those who for some reason knew things already? Anyway, after 2 classes you take a test, and after some more classes there's a final. These tests are fun if you're into this kind of thing, and I guess Game Freak was trying to go for a Persona-esque feeling with these missions. Because aside from classes, you can also talk to the teaching staff of the academy in the different classrooms, the teaching rooms or even cafeteria, and unlock a social link-esque feature that never actually goes anywhere. You have the nurse, for example, who is a character that you will never meet if you don't go to her office again and again and tell her of your adventures. The reward is just more dialogue, items, the quick travel points of the Ruins Quartet shrines, or even a Galar Meowth. This all could be quite cool, but the way it is implemented just doesn't work. Maybe the original intention of the game was more school-centric, having you return constantly to Mesagoza and do some school-related stuff. Or maybe instead of heading out to the treasure hunt immediately after the quick time skip, you play through the skip time and take some classes, having some smaller tasks and adventures before finally actually being let free to explore Paldea. But obviously that clashes hardly against the idea of a free and open world, so they try to eat their cake and have it too, by including both the classes and the freeform exploration, but it just doesn't work with the beginning of the game feeling like it drags on with no big rewards, having all 3 story beginnings pushed into the short amount of time you spend at school, and then letting you free while also offering the school-centric content, which is in no doubt simplified and now rather misplaced. The teachers are great characters, just like all the other major characters, with the standout for me being your home economics teacher Saguaro, whose story is about being perceived as a stereotypical big manly man who actually likes sweet and cute stuff and is having trouble admitting this. I do wonder if this content is worth it in the end though. Maybe the time should have rather been spent creating side quests and interiors in the different towns, because the stuff in the academy is basically exactly this sort of content. It just doesn't work as effectively and will probably be ignored by most people, which is a shame. So what do we have for post-game and endgame activities in this game? After finishing the story, there will be a big tournament created for everyone at school, with Nomona heading the planning. And to help Geeta have time to also take part in the tournament, we are tasked to revisit all the gym leaders and battle them again in order to evaluate everyone, which given how business-like these gyms are run feels kind of weird. All the gym leaders comment on how you perceive them and wonder what Geeta will think about your report and what this will mean for their future and their career. Once again, you can tackle all 8 gym leaders in any order you want, but they're all the same level now, skipping any puzzle and battling you with all they've got. This is especially interesting with Katie, the Bug-type gym leader, who was asked to use weak and low-level Pokemon because of the close vicinity of her gym to the academy. This rematch makes her want to try using harder Pokemon and have some more interesting battles in the future, which is a great way to characterize an otherwise pretty average gym leader. So while not hugely impressive in scope or depth, these gym leader rematches that have always been a thing people want are giving some great new characterization to all 8 gym leaders and might be my favorite part of the otherwise meager postgame. The tournament itself is a similar concept to the tournament in Sword and Shield. I guess this is again meant as a replacement for the Elite Four rematches, but it doesn't quite work as well. In Sword and Shield, the champion tournament was mostly fought against random trainers and their teams, with important characters also taking part. Here, all you fight are special characters, mostly from your school though, so you might refight Arven and Penny, Clavel and even Geeta here, but none of the gym leaders or Elite Four members sadly. And for the first time in a long line of games, there's just no battle tower or equivalent whatsoever. After Sword and Shield, which had a pretty simplified battle tower, which for me personally was a lot weaker than other battle towers because it had to rely on the shrunken down Galar decks and was also really easy to beat. At least I think so, because I never had any problems getting far and only stopped my runs because I was getting too bored of winning so easily. And now Scarlet and Violet don't feature a battle tower at all, which is curious to be honest. My first thought was that they might hold something like this, or even multiple battle facilities, back until the final DLC, so once they are able to program in more than just the 400 of the original regional decks, but so far nothing has been discussed and this video was supposed to be finished way before the DLC even was announced, so hush and let's continue on. I'm honestly really sad that there's nothing like this so far, because it makes tough regular battles a multiplayer only component, and I'm personally not too interested in that, given the state of competitive Pokemon and the state of my brain and desire to invest time into this game. Especially double battles are sorely suffering under this, being literally just relegated to the Ghost-type gym. There are a couple of cute cutscenes in the school and post-game, where we get to talk to Auron a bit more and have him figure his future out, as well as see how the Team Star Squad leaders try to fit into the school. These scenes are quite hidden and allow us to visit the academy rooms of our friends, which is a cute little detail, and to me that's all it needs to be. Just some nice little closure for all the characters after all the big relevant plot stuff has happened. And lastly, there are the Terra Raid battles, which are available as soon as you're off on your treasure hunt. These continue in the vein of the raid battles of Sword and Shield, with being the bulk of long-term post-game content this game wants you to engage in, having had many different kinds of events, especially with first partner Pokemon of older generations, which often proved to be difficult fights, even though their difficulty was mostly just frustrating instead of interesting. First of all, the raids are a lot less formulaic and strict than the Sword and Shield ones. There's a new shield mechanic that only happens once in a battle, and can even be skipped if you do enough damage to take out the Pokemon immediately. It's also just a percentage of the Pokemon's remaining health, and once again you should engage with the current gimmick, in this case Terrestrialization, so that you can do the most damage to the shield. Instead of everyone attacking in turn and then waiting for the turn to be over, the turn order is now a lot more free form, which is sadly quite buggy, or at least poorly explained, especially when playing online. The game still seems to have an internal turn order which often gets interrupted at certain HP thresholds, when the raid Pokemon does something like reset all lowered stats, do some scripted attacks, or summon its shield. This makes the raids feel disjointed and even unfair when sometimes all you do is watch for maybe a minute while the timer goes down relentlessly and you can't even select a menu option even though it's right on your screen but won't work. And while the technical stuff is a big hurdle to overcome if you want to enjoy this intended endgame grinding activity, because here you get strong Pokemon and many items you need to train up your Pokemon, especially Terra Shards to change Terra types, the other big thing you have to deal with are the random trainers you play with online. While the offline NPCs are far less cumbersome than the raid NPCs from Sword and Shield, they are suboptimal. For example, using moves like Will-O-Wisp when the shield is up, preventing the move from working, they can be quite useful, especially the ones with Intimidate. And I personally rarely had problems winning even difficult raids with the offline NPCs. Online though can be a roller coaster. Sometimes you get clever people making good choices, but many times you will realize that maybe a lot of people playing these games do absolutely not have a full grasp of the type chart and the basic rules of Pokemon battles in their heads. It has become a meme that no matter what Pokemon you're up against, people will just use their Rhydon, Iron Hands or Azumarill. And maybe it's just the fact that 3 typings are too much for people to understand, but I don't see why you would use a fighting type against a psychic Pokemon just because its Terra type is Rock. It can still use psychic attacks easily and doesn't lose its psychic stab. Maybe it does make sense that Game Freak is making these games more brain dead easy, because people really do not look at the screen and don't care as long as they use their favorite Pokemon and flashy colors appear on the screen. Especially with all the different event raids this could be frustrating, but it's mostly the random 6-star Terra raids that I've had problems with, and most of them could be fixed by me just playing the raid with offline NPCs, so it never became a huge problem. Alright, so where does this leave us with? A game that's in all intents and purposes a step up from Sword and Shield? A fulfillment of the promise for a more open, freeform world and less handholding? Or just a weird step in between generations where the next one will finally fulfill the promises that were started here? You wanna know what I think? I think it doesn't even matter what people think about these games and their content, the story and general ambition. Because Scarlet and Violet graphically look the way they do and perform the way they do. You wonder what people think about the fact that true multiplayer is now available and that you can walk around the world together with your friend, can watch them battle and explore the world together? You wonder what people think about the GTS still being relegated to Pokemon Home? You're interested in discussing the time machine from the professor, which might actually not be a time machine at all, making the Paradox Pokemon really live up to their name, because of course not all future Pokemon will be robots, and of course Sandy Shocks is not a complete disregard for the invention of magnets, because it's not actually from the past? Good luck finding people talking about that, because the main discussion points are the visuals, the performance, and the bugs of these games. A promised performance patch that wasn't promised maybe, who even knows anymore, or bugs that may not be more than some silly visual glitches that always happen in big open world games, but are still prevalent nonetheless and make people's conceptions of this game be that it is a terrible buggy mess that shouldn't have been released in this state. And did you know that Pokemon is the highest profitable brand in the entire world, and this is the game they come up with? Compare it to Tears of the Kingdom or Dragon Quest XI or any other game you can think of. Look at the weird release schedule. Legends Arceus came out in January, and now we're here again? This is just a deeply unhealthy way to develop games, especially after Sword and Shield having to be cut down immensely, completely disregarding the original version for Galar that we're now never going to get. And also after just switching from development for the 3DS to the Switch, a huge leap in power and expectations. You will see a lot of love for the new Pokemon, and I honestly love the work they have put into the models. They're all much more realistic looking thanks to more advanced texture work, encompassing scales and fur, making Pokemon look more lifelike than ever before, even though for some like Camerupt it does look a bit weird and may need some fine tuning in the future. All the new animations for the perpetually flying Pokemon now being grounded, but still being able to battle when in the air, are amazing. And did you know how many Pokemon can just swim and battle at the same time? They've added and even changed so many animations for old Pokemon to make them look more active in battle, like with some evolutions and Ursaring for example. I really love that and hope they continue with this trend, because it helps make the Pokemon feel more alive and immersive, and it's the thing everyone's been wanting since X and Y. Sure, the low draw distance and suboptimal resolution results in you not really being able to see the small white Pokemon eating berries under the trees or sleeping, but these details are here and can only be enhanced in the next games. I love the design of the open world, which, while totally way too empty, is designed in many really cool ways, trying to make every area reachable in more than one way. And while pretty open in many ways, sometimes the design does feel reminiscent of the classic routes, just more open and vertical, which is exactly what we should be aiming for. Every place at least has something unique going for it visually, giving you a great sense of progression and familiarity with the region. But none of this matters. No one cares because the games look like they do and generally feel terrible to play in the more demanding areas, like the lake, where for some reason they decided to give all the wild Pokémon water reflections. Like, just turn them off. The game would run so much better. So that's why I tried not to talk about the graphics and performance too much in this video, because these games are great and interesting and a bold new step for the franchise. I enjoyed these games a lot and love playing them, and I can't wait for the DLC, which, as I'm writing this, will release in less than a day. I just wanted to add to the discussion in a way that maybe wasn't covered as much, and I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts. I'm curious to hear your views and would like to thank you for watching. I'll definitely try and make a video about the DLC, but until then, don't forget to put on sunscreen, try to give that vegetable you didn't like before another shot, and always be strong. Thank you for watching, see you next time.
Thank you.